is running at just 240p. This was a video that I made a few years ago, experimenting with upscaling to try and make ultra low res gaming a reality. And in the years since, it has become a more feasible option thanks to improvements in upscaling technology. Let's dive on in. This is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 at 360p. No anti-aliasing, just to show what it looks like in this game at a PS1 or PS2 era resolution. Not very nice. Something that anybody can do is to use a program like lossless scaling, which does its best to improve the look of a low resolution like this by smoothing the edges and by dithering the contents. There are a bunch of different modes you can use, like LS1, which is their own tech, or NIS, which is Nvidia's image scaling, but I think that AMD's FSR is the best of the bunch. Not that that's saying much, because it still looks horrible. And because your character's head is always bobbing about in this game, there are constant small movements which cause the scene to blob about and for the pixels to noticeably jump and vibrate. So this is Nvidia's DLSS, using the oldest preset A, which is like an early version of DLSS 2, which was already a pretty good form of upscaling. Bear in mind, without the upscaling it looks like this. So using the same base resolution, DLSS uses its trickery to produce 4 pixels from every one that's being rendered. I don't think it gets away with it, still looks shimmery and oddly pixelated for what's supposed to be a 720p end result, but it doesn't have to be as good as 720p. It just has to look better than whatever lower resolution it's running at the same speed as. So no, it probably won't run quite as fast as the 360p version on the left, but for the amount of image quality you're getting, it punches above its weight, and that's all that upscaling really needs to do to be worth using. But I don't know how much I trust preset A here, which looks a lot more dithered than I remember DLSS ever looking. So I disabled all the custom DLSS presets and just used the one built into the game, which uses some form of DLSS 3. And this definitely does a better job of toning down that dreaded dithering that preset A right here has, but it still doesn't do away with it entirely, causing the scene to appear to creep and shimmer at a sub-pixel level. Before we move on to the latest and greatest versions of DLSS, I think now's a great time for the battle of the upscalers, because Nvidia aren't the only company with an upscaler like DLSS. Thing is, Intel have gone and done something stupid by breaking the norm by having their performance upscaling setting be a lower base resolution than the standard agreed upon by Nvidia and AMD. I guess Intel did this so that the performance mode runs faster than other companies' performance modes, thus winning in benchmarks, but it does put Intel at a disadvantage in terms of image quality. And to be able to compare like for like, I actually have to use XESS's balanced preset to be the same 2x upscale that Nvidia and AMD's performance preset is. How confusing. So this is what XESS2 balanced preset looks like, but this is on an Nvidia graphics card, since it's way too much hassle to have to buy and install and to set up a PC with an Intel graphics card just for this one short tangent. Just kidding. Here the game is running on an Intel B580, and this is the image quality difference between using XESS on an Intel card and in running it on another sort of card. Smash that subscribe button. Ignore the slight colour difference between these two. I don't know what's caused that, but it isn't XESS. And you can see that the Intel XMX version of XESS on the right, yes there is a lot of X's, almost entirely removes the shimmer that's seen on the left hand side of the screen from using XESS on a non-Intel graphics card. The blurry cloud around the people, however, I think is further reaching and more distracting on the right, which is surprising to me because that's meant to be a more superior AI upscaler. In the game's menus there is a sharpness slider, but it is unfortunately disabled for XESS, unless you botch it by switching to FSR and then back to XESS again. Valve, please fix. So this is XESS on minimum sharpness, and this is it on maximum. Wow, so much difference! Overall, I do prefer XESS over FSR in this game, but you may feel that it has a bit less detail. From all my time encoding videos, I know that grain, or in this instance, flicker and dithering, can give the illusion of there being more detail on screen. But there is something to be said about having the option of a non-shimmering but slightly smearier image that XESS provides. Sadly, I'm not sure many people are familiar with XESS. FSR 3.1 is probably the one that more people are familiar with, and it's likely the go-to upscaler that people without an Nvidia graphics card would flock to. And I don't like it. The grass is reduced to a blobby mush, there are coloured artefacts around high contrast edges, like these leaves here with the sky behind, and even with all this blur, it still somehow manages distracting shimmering and popping all over the place. But maybe, if you really wanted to give FSR the benefit of the doubt here, it's the one upscaler here that doesn't over-sharpen the look of the foliage, which, being a rather bushy game, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has in abundance. Maybe you could argue it gives the image a unique and homely look, but that is being rather generous to what I consider to be the inferior upscaler. Poor AMD users. At least Nvidia users have DLSS, and Intel graphics card users have the improved version of XESS. What do AMD users have? It's a choice between the shimmering nature of the inferior version of XESS or the popping, fuzzy nature of FSR, or none at all. But maybe there's another option, because for users of the latest Radeon 9000 series, you also get the chance to use FSR4, aka FSR Redstone. This is the very latest and greatest upscaler from AMD, but if you have an older series of AMD card like the 7000 or 6000 series, you're shit out of luck. Sorry. Luckily for me, I do have a Radeon 9060, literally just in case this sort of situation ever arose. So I painstakingly installed it and did it all, though for some reason I wasn't sure if it was going to work. AMD tends to be a bit behind Nvidia on these sorts of things, like rolling out support for older games with newer versions of upscaling. And I think the asterisk on this screen scared me into thinking it might not work, but I needn't have feared, because it did, straight away. Loading Kingdom 2 Come Deliverance 2 immediately gave me the FSR4 option in-game, and all of the wonderful graphical improvements that come along with it. Look at that! I am happy that AMD are getting their act together and are taking upscaling seriously with their latest efforts. Such a marked improvement over FSR 3.1, so long as you don't like fuzzy, blotchy looking grass. FSR 4's grass looks more like grass, and there's no huge or noticeably blurry or blobby look going on around moving characters. And it makes fine edges on branches and lines on stuff more pronounced. A lot more pronounced. Check out the tree here. It's like every leaf on it has been expanded in size by about 25%, leading to fewer gaps for the sky behind to leak through. It's certainly a bold choice for FSR's upscaling to take this approach, which isn't evident with the other forms of upscaling I tested. This is XESS versus FSR4, and I hate to say it, but I still prefer the overall image quality with XESS. But I do acknowledge it has issues with blur behind moving objects, which FSR4 is a lot better at dealing with. And I think I might know why. It's because the Intel B580 graphics card running XESS is running at a much slower frame rate, so any potential artifacts in the image will last for far longer before being cleaned up by newer frames. The B580 shouldn't be slow. This is, after all, a super easy to run and optimised game, and I'm using upscaling from a super low resolution, but I didn't want to take any chances. Intel's drivers are known to be more demanding on slower processors, and I was just using a Ryzen 4 500, so I upgraded. And this is what I get for bothering to test XESS properly instead of trusting that gut feeling that it was going to become a very long and painful detour. So here it is on a Ryzen 5 700X3D instead, and it's still just as slow. So I just dropped it down to medium preset, the frame rate improved, and XS2 still proved to be a blurry and shimmery mess around moving objects. Damn. But I think I'm even more disappointed with FSR4, because given that this was meant to be AMD's big AI-driven upscaling breakthrough, all that hype and it barely brought the image quality ahead of XS. I think the way it overestimates the size of small objects perhaps makes FSR4 appear less detailed than it should do. But the one good thing about it was that the sharpness slider seemed to work. Maybe it was disabled with XS for a reason, since it didn't seem to do anything there. But here, you can adjust it all the way from very blurry to very sharp. Sweet spot is likely somewhere in the middle, but I ain't got time for that. And it's going to need all the sharpness it can get when up against DLSS 3, which, yes, does come with a bit more shimmering, but everything on screen looks so much higher in resolution. And let's be honest, that's what upscaling's all about. Again, the colours are different, so either Nvidia makes stuff less green than AMD or Intel do, or it's because I'm capturing this footage using Shadowplay with Nvidia versus OBS with AMD and Intel. I get it, it's annoying, it's distracting, but let's try and ignore the colour differences of these scenes here, since it isn't really what we're trying to focus on here. Put it simply, Intel and AMD's latest and greatest upscalers still don't look as detailed as DLSS 3 manages to in this game. Not even close. But they do appear to be more temporally stable, which will be of significant value to some people. But now we say goodbye to all of these and move on to Nvidia's latest, being DLSS 4 and 4.5. These are their new transformer models, which can work on any generation of RTX cards, but will significantly slow down cards older than the 4000 series, in other words the 2000 and 3000s. Choosing preset K in Nvidia's app forces DLSS 4, but just like it was in Cyberpunk, it seems broken here, being oddly blurry given how advanced it's supposed to be at remedying those sorts of problems. Yet here, it's like it has no clue what to do with all the motion. It looks like these two dancers are coated in a thick layer of Vaseline, like they're so fat that they're warping time-space itself, just like your mum, sucking the graphics into themselves and abusing the very fabric of our reality. I just can't take it any longer. In fact, using the built-in version of DLSS 4 in this game without any sorts of driver override proved significantly better. As you can see, it significantly reduces the blurriness around the characters that forcing preset K on did. But it's still not gone entirely. It still looks like these characters have a force field around themselves, there to remove aliasing around freshly revealed spots, but it might just end up being more distracting than if it wasn't there. Before we do anything else, let's remove preset K. It's offending my eyeballs. And instead, I proudly present to you Fluffykins. Yes, hello Fluffykins. Yes, yeah, wipe your face against the microphone. I proudly present to you Preset M, the supposed latest and greatest version of DLSS intended for performance Hello Fluffykins again, oh my god. Preset M, the supposed latest and greatest version of DLSS intended for this performance preset. Maybe. If you ask me, I think it's a step down in terms of overall quality compared with the default DLSS 4 seen in the game. The shimmering is all but gone, and there are fewer aliased twigs and leaves in the background, and I think there's less of a force field around the moving characters too. But with it, I personally think it looks slightly less crisp and clear than the default DLSS 4 does. But then we are zoomed into an already low-res image, let's zoom out and view the whole 720p image. Nah, I still prefer the default DLSS 4. But you know what's even better? Preset L. This was meant to be for ultra performance upscaling, yet it seems to be the best across the board. Almost no shimmering, seemingly more detail in my opinion, and next to no artifacts around the edges of characters dancing compared with Preset M. But enough of me trying to decide which one looks better. This here will decide it for us. It's a native 4K rendering of the game, using SMAA just to avoid any accusations of upscaling prejudice. Not that it matters, because what I'm going to do now is to get this footage and to crush it down to 720p, and to use it as like a 9x super sampled example of what the game is meant to look like if upscaling can properly represent the resolution it's trying to render, plus ludicrous amounts of anti-aliasing. A few short years ago, no one would have said this was possible. And here it is compared with Preset L, which is trying to create the image from 36 times fewer pixels. Like I said, witchcraft. The DLSS version does look a bit over-sharpened, but this is just using the default small amount of sharpening set in game. But it turns out that the sharpness slider on DLSS is very effective. Ramp it up to maximum and you end up with something suitably deep fried. If you turn it down to absolute minimum, then you get this. Virtually indistinguishable from downsampled 4K footage. I mean, it's still not quite there, but 36 times fewer pixels. And the fact it can get this close is proof to me that upscaling is more than just a poor man's anti-aliasing or a compromise you can strike to boost frame rates. It is becoming an absolute no-brainer for people to use. Although we will have to run benchmarks just to see if the performance impact is worth it. Yes, I know what you're going to say, you're going to demand benchmarks, which I'll do in good time, but I figured it made sense that before I benchmark these upscalers, I should probably make this kind of video first to actually know what the image quality of these upscalers is like. But my takeaway from all this is, this testing has proven to me that DLSS's transformer models are capable of excellent levels of upscaling. That there is what's most important. It's shown us that upscaling hasn't hit a wall with how well it can upscale stuff. It is still improving and could improve even further still. And yes, maybe these new models come with more of a performance impact when running on older generations of cards, but that's about as far as my criticism of these new models can go. To me, it's almost a moot point, and one that will become increasingly moot as time goes on. How anybody can see these things as being anything other than a huge net positive for gaming is a mystery to me. Now for the exciting bit. Let's conclude by comparing all of the different forms of upscaling to that perfect downscaled 4K footage. I'll start with what I hope will be the worst looking result, being just the 360p base image, which is the same resolution as what all the later upscalers will be attempting to upscale from. So if you genuinely hate upscalers, then go on, just play the game the way it looks on the left. You might as well marry it while you're at it. So this is our first upscaler, FSR1, which is nothing more than an edge smoothing algorithm. So unlike the other upscalers, this will work in any game. The downside is it's so bad you might not want it to. So we move on to FSR 3.1, and for all its faults, it's a lot better than no upscaling at all, even if it does look speckly and a blurry mess, and that's despite the sharpness slider being set to almost maximum here, for the sake of giving it a fair chance. Next, I think, is Intel's XESS, running on a non-Intel graphics card. It looks like a more refined version of FSR 3.1 to me, with subtler shimmering and more definition on fine edges. If you're on a Radeon 7000 series card or earlier, then I would seriously recommend giving this a try. Intel's XESS on an Intel graphics card is a further improvement. Ignore the colour differences and slower frame rate, sorry about that. But I like this one given that it's the first in this comparison that appears almost completely temporally stable, apart from around moving characters, which does go a bit fizzy and shimmery for a while. Which is why I rate FSR 4 above it, even if it does still take a few frames for the blur to leave in the trail left behind moving characters. And it is a bit heavy-handed in determining the outline of fine objects, making everything seem heftier and thicker than they actually are. But that might be your kind of thing, and it is nice to see AMD still improving their upscalers, even if I am personally a little bit underwhelmed by FSR 4 in this title, which is why I still put DLSS 3 ahead of FSR 4. This is using the built-in version of DLSS featured in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, but set to CNN in the options, which makes it some form of DLSS 3. Unlike FSR 4 and XS 2, this one does come with shimmering. It has an almost dithered look to it, but if you can look past all that, I think it provides some of the best image quality you can get from upscaling. In the other's defense, I do think that comparing a still example like this gives DLSS 3 an unfair advantage, and that the artifacts you see around the people dancing are more representative of how the scene might look as you're running through the wilderness, to which, I'll be honest, none of the upscalers so far have done a good job of resolving. Next is DLSS 4, also using the built-in options in-game. This to me looks pretty similar to DLSS 3. Suspiciously so. But the shimmer is reduced, the lines more liney, and the artifacts around moving things reduced to a thin force field layer, which is again further cut back with preset L, which I am now in love with, given that it comes so far towards achieving DLSS's original goal of super sampling the image, whilst managing to do so using just a quarter of the number of pixels. So in other words, this is good. But it's still not perfect, because at 720p resolution, there is only so much you can do to make it look better. It's still going to look pixelated. If only Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 supported ultra performance upscaling, then we could get this same base 360p resolution and attempt to upscale it all the way to 1080p to really challenge these upscalers. I did try forcing these settings in Nvidia's app, and this is how preset L looked in-game, which is just so good, I'm not sure I believe it's doing what I want it to here. This can't be a 360p base resolution, it just can't. It's too good to be true. And I did also test performance upscaling at 1080p and it looked exactly the same. So either preset L is so powerful that it can make 9 pixels out of every one flawlessly, or the game just isn't supporting this level of upscaling, even if I attempt to force it in the Nvidia control panel. So I'll leave my judgment about this for another video, but in terms of performance upscaling, the models we have now are getting pretty damn good.